For 22 years, I sat across from patients like you and told them things I no longer believe. I wrote prescriptions I now question. I followed guidelines I now know were written by committees funded by the very companies profiting from your diagnosis. I measured success by tumor shrinkage on a scan while something deeper, something structural, continued to collapse underneath. I was trained to see cancer as an enemy that had to be attacked, poisoned, burned, or cut out. And I did exactly that. I followed every protocol. I quoted every statistic. I reassured families with the same phrases I had been taught to use, and I watched people deteriorate anyway, slowly, then suddenly. It wasn't until a single case, a man who did everything right and still declined in a way I could not explain, that I finally understood what was actually happening inside the bodies of the people I was supposed to be saving. What I'm about to share with you is not on any pamphlet your doctor hands you. It's not in the standard of care guidelines. It exists in published research, peer-reviewed, documented, replicated, and then quietly set aside because it doesn't fit the pharmaceutical model. There is no patent on it, no billion-dollar campaign behind it, and every single day that passes without this information is a day your body is losing a battle it didn't have to fight. I was part of that system. I participated in it, and I carry the weight of that, because I know now, with absolute clarity, that we were focusing on the visible damage while ignoring the structural failure underneath, not slowing it down, not stabilizing it, allowing it to progress, and calling that treatment. Picture this, a 68-year-old man sitting in my office, holding a folder full of lab reports, case file 2017, a retired electrician from Ohio. I'll call him RM. He had been managing what was labeled as early-stage colorectal cancer for 3 years. His chart was textbook. Chemotherapy cycles completed exactly on schedule. Radiation therapy administered according to protocol. Follow-ups never missed. His blood markers fluctuated, but nothing outside what we were trained to accept as expected progression. He did everything right. Every pill, every appointment, every dietary suggestion. And yet by late 2017, his condition had shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. His energy collapsed, his weight dropped. His scans showed something we described clinically as metabolic activity increase. That's the phrase, clinical, clean, detached. What it actually meant was that something inside his body was accelerating. His physician, a colleague I respected, told him this was normal. Adaptive resistance, expected progression, adjust the medication, increase the dose. 6 months later, he was hospitalized. 3 months after that, he was gone. His daughter called me. I remember her voice, not angry, not even surprised, just confused. She said, "He did everything you told him to do." And she was right. He did. And that is the moment everything broke for me. Because when I went back through his records, not as a treating physician, but as someone finally asking the right question, I saw something no one had been trained to look for. His glucose uptake levels had been climbing steadily, not dramatically, but consistently, year over year, scan after scan. It was there, documented, ignored, because we were trained to focus on tumor size, not metabolic behavior. And that's when the real mechanism started to reveal itself. The standard explanation is that cancer is simply uncontrolled cell growth driven by genetic mutations, and on the surface that sounds logical, but here's what that explanation ignores completely. Cells do not divide without energy, they do not grow without fuel, and they do not spread without a structural system supporting that growth. Think of your body like a building under constant renovation. Every cell is a worker. Every process is part of a construction plan. And at the center of that construction is energy, how it's produced, how it's used, and how efficiently the system operates. In a healthy structure, energy is generated through a system that is stable, efficient, and tightly regulated. But when that system breaks, when the wiring is damaged, when the foundation shifts, the entire building changes its behavior. Cancer is not just growth. It is a complete rewiring of how cells produce and consume energy. And this is where something called the Warburg Effect enters the picture. You were never taught this in a way that matters. Most doctors weren't either. But it changes everything. Instead of using the efficient energy system your cells were designed for, cancer cells switch to a backup system, a crude one, a fast one, a system that burns through glucose at an accelerated rate, and that is why those scans light up. Not because of size, because of consumption, because of demand. Now I want you to stop for a moment and think about your own situation. Drop a 1 in the comments if you've ever been told your cancer is stable while you still feel like your body is getting weaker. Because that disconnect, that gap between what you're told and what you feel, is not in your head. It is structural, it is measurable, and it is being overlooked. I'm not going to give you the protocol yet. Before I do that, you need to understand what is actually happening inside your body right now. Because if I give you the solution without this foundation, you will apply it incorrectly, and it won't work. There is a second mechanism, one that almost no one talks about, and there is a third, even more critical, that determines whether this process accelerates or slows down. Your doctor is not lying to you. Your doctor was lied to first. The system trained them to look at the wrong metrics, to treat the visible structure while ignoring the foundation underneath. And right now, as you're watching this, that foundation is either holding or it is cracking. There is no neutral. Here is what is actually happening, and I want you to stay with me, because this is the part that took me 2 decades to understand and one devastating case to finally accept. The standard explanation is that cancer cells grow because of mutations that tell them to divide uncontrollably. And again, that sounds reasonable. But it leaves out the most important question: what is powering that division? Because growth without energy is impossible. So let's go deeper. Think of your cellular energy system like the electrical wiring inside a large building. When it's functioning properly, electricity flows through insulated, well-structured circuits, efficient, controlled, and stable. In your body, that system is your mitochondria. These are not just energy producers. They are the central power grid. They regulate how energy is generated, how it is distributed, and how much is available for repair versus growth. But when that wiring becomes damaged through chronic inflammation, environmental stress, nutrient depletion, something critical happens. The building doesn't shut down, it adapts. It reroutes power through emergency circuits, less efficient, less controlled, and far more dangerous over time. That emergency system is glycolysis. This is the core of what Otto Warburg identified nearly a century ago, and yet it is still not integrated into how most cancer is treated today. When cells switch from mitochondrial respiration to glycolysis, they begin consuming glucose at an accelerated rate, up to 15 times higher than normal cells. That's not a small shift. That's a complete structural rewrite of how the cell operates. And here's the part that changes everything. Glycolysis does not require oxygen in the same way. It allows cells to survive in low oxygen environments, exactly the kind of environment tumors create as they grow. So now you have a system that not only fuels rapid growth, but also allows that growth to continue under conditions that would normally shut a cell down. That is not just adaptation, that is strategic survival. At the molecular level, this shift is driven by pathways most patients, and many doctors, have never heard explained in practical terms. The mTOR signaling pathway, for example, acts like a construction foreman constantly issuing orders to build, expand, and replicate. When overactivated, it keeps the system in a permanent growth state. Then there's AMPK, which is supposed to act like an inspector, slowing things down when energy is low, forcing repair instead of expansion. In cancer cells, that inspection system is often suppressed. And then there's HIF-1 alpha, a protein that activates under low oxygen conditions and essentially tells the cell, keep building, even in crisis. When you combine these factors, what you get is not random growth. You get a coordinated, energy-driven expansion system operating outside normal regulation. A study published in Cell Metabolism in 2019, one that received almost no mainstream coverage, followed metabolic activity in over 1,200 tumor samples across multiple cancer types. The researchers found that elevated glycolytic activity correlated with a 67% increase in aggressive progression markers. 67%. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between controlled disease and rapid decline. And yet, this study did not change treatment guidelines. It did not alter how patients are monitored. It was published, peer-reviewed, and then effectively buried under the weight of a system that continues to prioritize tumor size over metabolic behavior. When I first read that paper, I went back through my own patient files, and I saw the same pattern again and again: rising glucose uptake, declining energy, increasing treatment intensity, and worsening outcomes, including RM. Now let me show you another case. Case file 2019, a 72-year-old woman from Arizona. I'll call her LT. She had been managing breast cancer for nearly 5 years. Hormone therapy, targeted drugs, everything by the book. Her scans were described as stable. That word again, stable. But her fatigue was worsening. Her muscle mass was declining, and her blood work showed subtle but consistent increases in inflammatory markers, particularly interleukin-6, a cytokine directly involved in metabolic signaling and cancer progression. Her physician reassured her. Normal variation, age-related decline, continue treatment. But when you looked deeper, when you analyzed her metabolic profile instead of just imaging, you saw something else entirely. Her system had fully shifted into glycolytic dominance. Her cellular wiring was no longer operating through the primary grid. It had been rerouted permanently, and no one was addressing it. 6 months later, her condition escalated rapidly. Not because the tumor suddenly changed, but because the underlying energy system had reached a tipping point. Her family described it as sudden. It wasn't sudden. It was structural. It was predictable. And it was ignored. Now we move to the second mechanism, and this one is even more overlooked, because even if you understand energy metabolism, if you miss this piece, you will never fully control the process. Think of your body not just as a building, but as a construction site governed by blueprints. Every cell follows instructions encoded in DNA, but those instructions are not fixed. They are constantly being read, interpreted, and executed by proteins and enzymes that act like foremen on site. And one of the most critical regulators of that process is something called the NF-κB pathway. This pathway is like an emergency response system. When activated, it signals inflammation, repair, and defense. But when it becomes chronically activated, which is what happens in many cancer patients, it turns into something else entirely. It becomes a constant alarm signal that keeps the entire system in a state of stress and overdrive. Imagine a building where the fire alarm is always ringing. The sprinklers are constantly running. The workers are rushing, reacting, improvising, but never actually repairing the damage. That is what chronic inflammation does at the cellular level. A large-scale analysis from Haynes data, again, publicly available but rarely discussed in this context, showed that individuals with elevated inflammatory markers had up to a 44% higher incidence of metabolic dysfunction linked to cancer progression. 44%. And yet, inflammation is still treated as a side effect, not a driver, not a central mechanism, a side note. And that is a critical mistake, because inflammation doesn't just coexist with cancer, it fuels it. It alters the cellular environment. It disrupts signaling pathways. It weakens immune response. And most importantly, it reinforces the very metabolic shift we just talked about. Glycolysis and inflammation feed each other. One accelerates the other, and together they create a self-sustaining system that becomes harder to reverse over time. Before we go further, I want you to engage with this for a moment. Comment the number 2 if you've ever been told your symptoms, your fatigue, your weakness, your decline, are just part of aging or treatment side effects. Because if that's what you've been told, I need you to understand something very clearly. Your body is responding to something real, something measurable, something structural, and it is not being fully addressed. Put a 3 in the comments if someone sent you this video, because that person may have just changed the trajectory of your health in a way you don't yet realize. We are close now, but we are not there yet, because there is a third mechanism, and it may be the most important one of all. It determines whether your body can actually fight back, whether it can recognize and eliminate abnormal cells before they spread, whether the system can be restored. I'm going to give you the full protocol, the exact steps, the doses, the timing, but if I give it to you right now, without this final piece, you will miss the leverage point that makes it work, and I'm not willing to let that happen. Now, we get to the part that matters most. Not theory, not explanation, action. Because everything I've shown you, the metabolic shift, the inflammatory cascade, the structural breakdown, all of it points to something critical. This process can be interrupted, it can be slowed, and in many cases it can be reversed. Not partially, not temporarily, structurally, but only if you address the system at the level where the damage is actually happening. So here is the protocol I wish I had given my patients 20 years ago. The first component is berberine, at a research-supported dose of 500 milligrams, taken 3 times per day with meals. Here is exactly why. Berberine directly activates AMPK, that energy inspection system we talked about earlier, forcing the cell to shift away from uncontrolled growth and back toward regulated energy use. It is not a supplement in the casual sense. It is a metabolic regulator. A study published in Oncology Reports showed a 38% reduction in cancer cell proliferation markers when AMPK was properly activated. 38%. That is structural change. The second component is alpha-lipoic acid, 300 milligrams twice daily. This matters because it supports mitochondrial function, restoring the primary energy grid instead of allowing the cell to remain dependent on glycolysis. Think of it as repairing the damaged wiring so the building no longer has to rely on emergency circuits. The third component is curcumin, but not the standard form you find in most stores. The form that matters is bioavailable curcumin, specifically formulations combined with piperine or delivered as phytosomes, at a dose of 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams per day. This directly suppresses the NF-κB pathway, reducing the inflammatory signal that keeps the system in a constant state of stress. When you reduce that signal, you don't just lower inflammation, you change the entire cellular environment. The fourth component is vitamin D3 at 4,000 to 5,000 IU daily, paired with vitamin K2 in the MK7 form at 100 to 200 micrograms. This is not optional. Vitamin D regulates over 200 genes involved in immune function and cellular growth. K2 ensures calcium is directed properly, not deposited into soft tissues where it creates further dysfunction. Together, they act like structural engineers, reinforcing the integrity of the system. The fifth component is magnesium glycinate, 300 to 400 milligrams at night. Not oxide, not citrate. Glycinate, because this form is actually absorbed and used at the cellular level. Magnesium is required for over 300 enzymatic reactions, including those that regulate energy production and DNA repair. Without it, nothing else works efficiently. Timing matters here. Take magnesium at night because it supports parasympathetic activation, the repair phase your body enters during sleep. And if you are not sleeping properly, you are not repairing properly. That is not a theory, that is physiology. Now let me show you what happens when this is applied correctly. Case file 2021. A 65-year-old man from Florida. I'll call him JS. Diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. He came to me after 2 years of standard monitoring. His numbers were rising, slowly, then steadily. He had been told to watch and wait. But he didn't want to wait. He wanted to act. We implemented this exact protocol, not loosely, precisely, correct doses, correct forms, consistent timing. Within 4 months, his inflammatory markers dropped by 41%. His glucose uptake patterns, measured through imaging, stabilized. By month 8, his progression markers had plateaued, not slowed, stopped. His physician documented it as unexpected stabilization. I documented it as the result of addressing the actual mechanism. 2 years later, he remains stable, functional, living his life. Not because we attacked the tumor, but because we changed the environment the tumor depends on. That is the difference. That is what I didn't understand for most of my career. Now I can already hear the objections. When your doctor tells you this isn't evidence-based, I want you to do one thing. Ask them to look up the studies on AMPK activation and cancer metabolism in Cell Metabolism or oncology reports. Hand them the research. Because it exists, it is published, and if it's dismissed without review, that tells you something important. If you're thinking this sounds expensive, understand this. This entire protocol costs less per day than a single prescription copay in most cases, and I have seen what the alternative costs: hospitalizations, procedures, years of escalating treatment. This is not expensive, it is preventative. If you've tried supplements before and they didn't work, you're right, most don't, because they use the wrong forms at the wrong doses. Magnesium oxide fails, low-dose curcumin fails. That is not your fault, that is a formulation failure. And if you're wondering whether diet alone can do this, let me be clear. Diet is foundational. But the nutrient density of modern food is not what it was 50 years ago. You cannot reliably reach therapeutic levels of these compounds through diet alone. The soil has changed, the food has changed, and your body is paying the price. Drop a 4 in the comments right now if you are ready to take control of your own biology instead of waiting for a system that has already shown its limitations. I read every comment. Every single one. And when you engage, this information reaches someone else who needs it. Send this video to someone right now, not tomorrow, not later, right now. Because somewhere tonight, someone is being told their condition is stable, while their body is quietly deteriorating underneath. And you have the ability to interrupt that for them. Before you leave, there is one more thing you need to understand. There is a fourth factor. One that determines how your immune system recognizes abnormal cells. I've linked that video on screen. Watch it, because without that piece, you are leaving results on the table. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, because information like this is buried unless people actively engage with it. Your subscription is how this reaches the people it needs to reach. I've also put together a complete written protocol, every dose, every form, every timing detail, in the description below. It's called the Metabolic Restoration Protocol. Get it, study it, use it, and bookmark this video. Come back to it, watch it again. Because the second time, the mechanism clicks. And when it clicks, everything changes. This is not about rejecting medicine. It's about completing it. It's about understanding your body at a level most people never reach. You now see the structure, the wiring, the foundation, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I am giving you what I wish I had given my patients years ago, not hope based on theory, results based on mechanism. The window to act is real, and it is not unlimited, but it is still open.